You're listening to part 2 of The Future of Dog Breeding with Dr. Jessica Hekman. So if you missed part 1, now's your time to jump back into that conversation. But if you're ready for your second bit, here we go. So like for you, obviously you've got a massive data brain, and I'm really interested in the stuff that you've done with Darwin's Ark to collate this like huge pile of anyone who loves research is just like, oh, give us the data. That's amazing. And just, I love that there is this place now that is starting to gather as much data. Do you think that the current technology and the way it's going would be able to support the amount of data we have right now if everybody, say, magically across the world, what if the world all got together and said, right, we're going to fill out the same form today and put all of our data into this system? Do you think the technology that we have right now is substantial enough to kind of take that data with brains as amazing as yours and other researchers and give us a better capacity to breed dogs, to match them and to select for certain traits? Are we there yet, or is that something of the future, do you think?
Yeah. So the challenge that Darwin's Ark struggled with and still struggles with, to the best of my knowledge, was not the ability to store data. When we're talking about data at that size, it does get somewhat expensive, but data storage was not the most expensive or most difficult part. And it wasn't all that hard to get people to come answer the questions. And they certainly, if that had been the problem, they could have advertised more, but that wasn't the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem was that in addition to people answering the questions, they also needed to assess the genetics of each of those dogs. So they needed to sequence the genome of each of the dogs. Mm-hmm. And that cost about $90 to $100 per dog. Wow. And so to put that into perspective, when we first sequenced the first human genome, it cost millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. Then that came down to a few thousand, and then it came down to 1,000. The fact that Darwin's Ark is able to get millions of markers out of the genome for only $100 is really revolutionary. And it's really impressive how far the technology has come. However, if we're talking about such a massive number of dogs, $100 per dog, as reasonable as that is, becomes quite a bit of money. Yeah. And finding the funding to do that turns out to be challenging. So where do you go, right? Mm-hmm. The federal government would be one possibility, and they, again, to the best of my knowledge, sort of continue to try that angle. And that was how they got started. The federal government really wants to give money to study human behavior, not dog behavior. And it is very true that dogs make what we call a good scientific model for humans, that you can study dogs and learn a lot about humans. But that still turns out to be sometimes a difficult ask. Mm-hmm. So there's that possibility, which is not closed, but it's, also not providing the full financial support to sequence thousands upon thousands of dogs, which is what we really want. Like, that would be the holy grail. That would be fantastic. Yeah. And so then, private foundations, asking individuals to pay for their own dogs. These are all things that I know Darwin's Ark has been looking into and presumably still is looking into. But just figuring out that problem was, one way of looking at it is there's always going to be something that stops you. So everything else ended up working really smoothly, right? But yes. that was the point at which everything else sort of came to the point of like, okay, we've sequenced 2,000 dogs, which, man, is a lot. That is a lot. Right. That is really impressive, but really would rather sequence 10,000. Yes. So, the cost of sequencing is falling. So hopefully, everything is changing right now. So I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful about it.
That's so exciting. And you know what? It's crazy that we always talk about this when it comes to many. We're talking a lot in the UK right now about dog bites on humans and deaths. Unfortunately, they're definitely on the rise. And, really, I know the fact in the UK anyway, we're spending something in the region of £71 million a year just dealing with, 8,000 hospitalized cases of humans being bitten by dogs. So like, really, we've got the money. And I would say, the pet industry is worth billions certainly in the UK, I dread to think how big the pot of funding that goes into us looking after our dogs in the US is, just probably huge. But it's there, isn't it? I think we just kind of need to change our perspective on sometimes on how we're spending money and like how useful something is. I think if we could say to ourselves, hey, we're gonna breed the next generation of dogs to not kill people, unless they've been specifically designed to do that and are owned by, the army. Do we want to get rid of the berserker dog? All of these questions and more on another episode of which dog should we keep.com. But yeah, let's just sweep background, if that's okay, Jessica, to health, because that's a huge, we've talked a bit about behavioural health. That hurts my heart in a big way, because I see lots of dogs who are just not coping well in the environment that they've been moved into, or they're not being bred in such a way that they have, neuroplasticity and the capacity to bounce back from stress well, and that's complicated. But let's just let's swing into physical health for a moment, and talk about some of the things that are on your heart to change in the realm of the physical health of dogs. What problems do dogs have? What do you hope for the future that we can start to eradicate with really thoughtful breeding?
Yeah, so there are sets of genetic disorders that we tend to see more often in some dog breeds than in other dog breeds. And, I could list a dozen probably, and different breeds have gotten stuck down different avenues than others. But some breeds have, massive prevalence of a particular kind of cancer. Some have a lot of hip dysplasia, some have heart disease. Some have a lot of, neurological disorders like epilepsy. And if you're in dogs, you probably can think of a breed for each of those disorders that I mentioned. So, so why is that? How can we change that? In a lot of cases, it's really hard in a particular breed to breed away from those particular problems. And there are certainly breeders who are trying with great determination to do so, but their hands are really tied behind their backs in a lot of cases, where the problem is just so entrenched in the breed at this point genetically that it becomes hard to breed away from it unless you start bringing in genetics from outside the breed. And there is a very strong culture of believing that the only way to responsibly breed a dog is to breed a purebred dog. And yet of some breeds, it's very hard to do that with a low risk of, some particular genetic problem for, whatever breed that is. And so that's another thing that we're struggling with at the Functional Dog Collaborative is, so how do we help support people trying to find solutions to that? How do we help change the culture so that, if you want to start, it's called outcrossing, right? If you want to outcross and produce some dogs that are similar to a particular breed, but they're not purebreds because, you've brought in some other genetics. And what we found is that there are homes for those dogs, people who want, again, talking about pet dogs, but, also people who want dogs for particular jobs. They tend to be more interested in making sure the dog does that job well. If that, the job may be being a good companion. They're very interested in the dog being healthy. They're not so interested in making sure that the dog's pedigree looks a certain way, or that the dog, has that, that very specific structure or color patterning that would make them conform to the standard, or be successful in the show ring. So there's different goals that different groups of people have, right? Some groups of people have this goal of producing dogs to be very strictly conforming to a standard, and often related to that to be successful in the show ring. And that's very, very hard sometimes to do that, and to also be reducing the risk of some of these diseases. As much as those breeders typically really want to reduce that risk, it's very hard to do that within that particular, the confines of that particular sort of cultural box.
Mm.
So that is one of the things that we're struggling with is, how do we find a world in which it's okay for some people to do that, and not be, actually really bullied often on social media for doing it, to be supported and to understand that this is, we're producing dogs for people as good pets, and it's sort of a separate world. So.
Yeah. It's so hard, isn't it? I saw a meme the other day for a ladies magazine, and it was like the title bit at the top of the magazine, and it said how to lose weight in a week on page 3, and then you're exactly just who you're supposed to be on page 23, and then a recipe for cake on page 39. You're like, okay, what are we trying to do here, guys? What are we aiming for? And I think this is kind of my heart for the future of dogs, is just to get into these conversations lovingly with a childlike heart, because the thing is that we are all behaving, aren't we? We are wildly behaving all over the world, making choices, and we've all got different priorities on what we think is important. And I love that, actually, about human beings, is that there is such a vast variety of perspectives. What gets me, I think, sometimes as a behaviourist is when we have got ourselves into a thought-based corner. So as you described with like Labradors, say, for example, in hip dysplasia, the Labrador has hip dysplasia. They just do, and so we measure it, we hip score them. We're like, they all have it, so let's just score them based on how bad it is, And so, but I see humans do that with behaviour too, and we get so far down a thought train that we don't actually know how to back up out of it and go, what was the point? Why are we doing this that we were doing? And I think for me it's super hard, because I've worked with trainers, I've worked with dog owners, I've worked with breeders, I've been to many shows, and I love the culture of dog shows. I think people get a vast amount of socialization there with other humans. There's a wonderful sense of community there, and it's such a deep love for dogs. I have a lot of love for breeders, but it's tricky, isn't it, with breed standards, because we are, this is something I used to say about 10 years ago, it blew my mind and still does, that we're trying to create a dog who looks like a dog that someone decided a dog should look like 100 years ago.
Right.
And so I think, it would be helpful for everybody if we were all a little bit more broad when it came to thinking of what a breed standard should look like. And I don't know, like, from my perspective, in terms of pedigree dogs are great because you know who their parents are. You're measuring breeding. You're measuring the parents. You're collecting that family tree, that lineage, that history. And I guess my question for you is, do you think there'll ever come a day where we might start to look at pedigree as not a pure breed of dog, but a collection of a breeding history? So I could get, say, a crossbreed dog right now, and if I liked the traits, start that generational pedigree with that dog and say, this dog is A, and these are its genes, and this is where I'm starting from, and I'm paying my £90, and Darwin's Ark is getting lots of really good, helpful, useful information, and I'm going to start my dog's pedigree here. And collect information for the next generation on this dog's pedigree. What do you think about something like that? Do you think that might be something that the future might be able to grasp a hold of, or what are the limiting factors for us creating that kind of environment for the future?
I mean, there certainly are breeders who are currently trying to create dogs for specific goals, and doing that outside of breeds. And this has been true in the sport dog world for a while, but it's starting to become a thing in the pet dog world as well. People saying, my goal is to create a dog that is good at agility, or good at being a pet, or good at both. And I don't really care what breeds I use to do that, but they are tracking the pedigree very carefully. Mm-hmm. So actually, amusingly, I talked to one person who had an intentionally bred sport mix, and she had his pedigree tracked back many generations, and she knew all the breeds that were in him, to such an extent that she had him tested at Embark to get and she was curious about health testing, but she got back the list of breeds that they could detect. And some of the breeds that she knew were in there were at such small percentages because it was so long ago that Embark couldn't detect them, but she knew that they were there.
Wow.
So there are people who are carefully, responsibly, thoughtfully breeding, maintaining pedigrees, and breeding for particular traits outside of breeds right now. It's just not. It's not a sort of a part of mainstream dog culture, right? It's something that a lot of people don't know about, or people who do know about it often sort of have this belief that if you're breeding outside of a specific breed, then you must be doing a bad job of breeding. That there's no way. I mean, I've had people say to me, there's no way to responsibly breed outside of purebred dogs, which I very much disagree with, but there are people who strongly believe that. I'm not sure that answers your question. Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful because it just goes to show actually that season change is sort of starting, and some people are going, actually, I can do this. I can create a really good next generation of dogs. And you know what? I think it's super hard, isn't it? Because we all want to have measures of control, because anybody walking around with a gun is a potential threat. Say, for example, if you're walking around with a gun and you're a 5-year-old, I want to control that behavior because a 5-year-old should not have a gun. That's a danger, So I know if you're a big fan of your breed and you've spent, 10, 20 years investing in breeding that particular dog, and people want to sort of, it feels like it's a disrespect, I suppose, to all of your legacy and your history to just take that and then outcross it. I'm sure that's where a lot of breeders of pedigree dogs come from. And I know I've worked with some pedigree dogs, breeders who, for example, with the Irish Wolfhound are going, no, I want these dogs to live longer. I'm selectively breeding for long-lived Irish Wolfhounds because it's a travesty that they die so young because they're so big. So there's a lot of people who just are pouring so much love into their breed. I think there are going to start to become more and more questions over the next decade about, some breeds of dog who maybe physically and behaviourally don't necessarily fit into the pet dog environment. I don't know if, that's different over in the US. I'm sure you have a totally different landscape of preferred pet dogs versus working dogs. But I wonder if you were going to sort of work towards changing the health and behaviour. If you had your top 3, if you could shoot off 3 things that were I'd really love to see this, and this change in breeding, what would they be?
I would like to see a centralized place for breeders to register their health and pedigree information in order to transparently share that with other people to help support the sort of second thing that I'd like to see, which would be a cultural shift to a place where that kind of transparency is really supported and applauded, celebrated, where someone could report publicly, yes, I bred a dog that has epilepsy and, something that can't be tested for, but it is a very serious disorder. And I'm going to let everybody know about this publicly so that people can make appropriate decisions. And there would be no blowback on that person, no statement of, well, I'm never getting a dog from your lines if so that kind of cultural support and celebration of transparency. And then the third thing would be cultural support for people breeding dogs, either in or out of breeds, with being able to prioritize good health and resilient behavior without limitations of standards or of particular aesthetics or of needing some sort of aesthetic goal for the dog. And that I don't believe that all breeding necessarily needs to be that way. I understand that there are people for which breeding for the standard is just, such an important central part of how they interact with dogs and with dog breeds and how they perceive a breed. But the support of having there be another way of doing it and have that way coexist, and be accepted culturally and again celebrated as something that's valuable.
It's beautiful. That is a world I would be really happy to live in, to be honest with you. I think we all would, you know. We're all trying. We're all and I think everybody has the right to own a dog and work with it and learn. And so many breeders that I've met have just been like, I love my dog and I wanted to make 2 of them. I think that's, you know,
Yeah.
I get it. I totally get it. Some people aren't having children and actually their dogs are their children and their dogs' children are their grandchildren. And that's just beautiful, I think. So I love that. Those are 3 beautiful goals. And so if you were going to give, obviously, Jessica, we have a broad audience segment. So if you were going to talk to, I'd love your top 3 tips for breeders and your top 3 tips for buyers for the next generation from everything you know in the world of genetics and breeding for behaviour and the way that you're seeing the sea change in your industry. What are the top 3 things that you would love breeders to know or do, other than obviously share information and be kind to each other? What would be your top 3 tips for breeders who are just new at this? They don't know anything. They're not in community and they want to be good breeders, but they don't really know where to start. What would you suggest?
Okay. Well, so for new breeders, I would say find a mentor, find someone who's doing what you want to do, or who's doing part of what you want to do. You may not find a person who's doing everything you want to do, but find someone that you can learn from and apprentice with them. Learning from someone else is something that can't be replaced other ways, but also go learn online, or from books. There are a lot of good resources out there for increasing your sort of book knowledge about how things work. So that's, both work with someone for sort of the practical side and just learn about genetics, learn about raising puppies, learn about puppy diseases that you might, or dog breeding diseases, like all of that stuff, learn about it. And then the third thing is to take socialization really, really seriously. That is, you have, as a breeder, you have those puppies in such a malleable period of their lives. You can have a really big effect on them, and certainly the home that they end up in will also have a big effect on them. But as a breeder, you can't underestimate the power that you have to give them a really good start. So take that seriously.
And there's so many resources. I have a free one that you can grab right now on amplifiedbehavior.com. It's a free puppy socialization course. It's just looking at the development of puppies when they're young. And I think there's loads. If you Google puppy socialization, I think for those of you that are breeders but maybe don't know so much about training and behavior, just remember that socialization is not just hanging out with other dogs. And that's one of the most common misconceptions, is just let your dog jump and hang out with loads of other dogs and loads of other puppies, put them in with kids. Socialization is a process and there's key ages. So that's amazing, Jessica. Thank you for that one. And so what would you say towards buyers of the future? What are your top 3 tips? I want to go puppy shopping. It's an absolute roulette. The world is full of people who it's really difficult to find the dog that I want. I don't even know what dog it is necessarily that I want. What would you say to buyers of the future when it comes to educating themselves or looking for their perfect dog?
So I would say, the first way to narrow down what you're interested in is to select a few breeds that seem like they would be appropriate for you. So if you have toddlers crawling around the house, a Malinois is probably not best. And it is certainly true that probably in any breed, you could probably find a dog who was a good match for you. But again, we're talking about risk management. And so you'll have a better chance of finding the right dog for you in the appropriate breed. So, ask around, figure out which types of dogs. And when I say breeds, it could be a purebred breed. It could be that you are interested in one of the groups of breeders who are producing mixes that are your type of dog, but sort of figure out what is the type that you're going for and how to find that match. Then try to find a breeder who's really producing dogs that are of the type of dog that you feel would really fit well into your house, and build a relationship with that breeder. So it is certainly not the case that you could just say, I'm going to find the ideal breed. Golden retrievers seem like they'd be a really good match for my household, and then just get any dog of that breed. You need to find people who are doing a really good job at producing the type of dogs that you are interested in. So, and again, that, be that golden retriever, golden doodle, or what we call a multi-generational mix. And I guess it's hard to pick just three things.
I know, right?
I'm already having regrets. I'm already, for the breeder thing, I'm already thinking like, should I have emphasized health testing more? But,
it's so hard.
But I guess the other thing I would say is become a dog nerd. So be prepared, so you're going to have to learn a lot about what is appropriate for a breeder to do, but find a breeder that you really feel that you can trust and that you feel is doing a really good job, but then become a dog nerd and learn about how you're going to have to manage this dog when they come home. Be prepared to, again, you're the other half of the socialization component. Have a really good dog trainer laid in, be ready to go to puppy classes. Don't just think that the puppy's going to come home and you're going to just figure everything out, or that, an adult dog from a rescue group is going to come home and you'll just figure it all out. And, do some work ahead of time to understand how to manage the dog, how to train the dog, learn about dog body language. So just as I said that, hopefully a breeder would really educate themselves, hopefully the buyer will also really educate themselves.
Ace. That is such useful takeaways. Thank you so much, Jessica. Well, we're running out of time, so I just want to ask you this final question, and then we'll close. Obviously, you have done so much amazing study with a number of different organisations, and we haven't even touched on the study that came out this year that was controversial, but you guys can look into it if you want to, and read the study. That's the conclusion, I think. Ultimately, you need to read the study. And if you don't know how to read science, talk to someone who can read a study and talk to them about it.
I actually wrote a summary of that study intended for people who don't know how to read scientific studies.
Come on, where can we read that?
Yeah, so if you go to the Functional Dog Collaborative website, so you functionalbreeding.org, there is an article library where we have summaries of a bunch of different studies. And that particular study is in there. I can give you the URL and you can put it in your show notes if that's easier
amazing
for people.
Yes, spot on. We will stick
but
that
that's what I would recommend, because I tried to summarize, like, here's what it did. And then I tried to summarize, here's some of the controversy. And then here's at least my perspective on what it all means.
Sure.
So
I think, from a lame perspective, I'm an academic, but I've been training dogs for a long time and not reading as many studies as I could have done had I been still in research. But, it seemed to be a lot of a confusion around the way that the study was portrayed in the media. I think that's what a lot of people were just like, whoa, that's not correct to what the study actually said. So I'm just going to leave that as a teaser for the audience to go and dig into a little bit more on your amazing website. But tell us, just close for us, Jessica, with, what do you want to study next? What's your next bold move in the field of dog breeding? What's your oak tree that you're currently planting an acorn for right now?
So what I'm really trying to grow right now is that transparent database that I talked about. I really believe that is the missing component in this chaos where we're all trying to figure out, everyone wants to know, how do I find a good dog breeder? How do I breed dogs well? And I really think there needs to be a central place to put all of that data, and it needs to be a place where there's also some context for how to interpret that data. And so at the FDC, there's a group of us who've been working on what this would look like. We have a very sort of well-defined plan for how to grow it. We have potential partners. This is sort of this weird place where I don't want this potential partner to feel left out by my not mentioning her, but I also don't want to presume that that's going to go anywhere when it hasn't yet. But we do have a potential partner that we're working with. But there is just a lot of programming work that needs to be done, and a lot of money that is needed to pay programmers to do that work. So that is where I am right now, trying to figure out how to grow that thing.
It's exciting. It's exciting. And the next generation is very computer savvy. So I'm sure that you're going to have like a ton of students in the next 10 years that are like, I know how to program because I've been doing this for ages and I love dogs.
I hope so.
You never know. If that is you, then I would, jump online and talk to Jessica right now. And can I throw you my data, Jessica? Like, do you want that? Do you want global data?
I don't. Well, oh yeah. So yes and no, right? I don't have a place to put it. But globally, I think I don't see any benefit in restricting this to the United States. I think a global community that's the way dog breeding is going. And there are a lot of places where there are a lot of people who will import entire dogs or just the genetics, by which I mean semen, across the ocean. So I think dogs are already being bred that way, and we should all be working together.
Amazing. It's so wonderful to speak to you, Jessica, and thank you so much for coming on our show.
Well, thank you, Hannah. This has been a pleasure.
And I hope we get to hang out again. I think, to be honest with you, it's gonna blow up, and everyone's gonna be talking about this particular episode because it's very en vogue. And hopefully we'll get you back in a season or two and see how you're getting on with the collaborative. And we just wish you all of the love with your what ifs and your amazing community who are learning to have better conversations. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's all for another episode of The Future of Dogs. All of you just keep going, keep dreaming your big what ifs and changing the world.